In terms of entrepreneurship for you, were there inspirations when you were growing up, or is it something you just organically found your way into?
Yeah, I mean, I don't I mean, I was definitely as a child was always trying to do the opposite of what my brother was doing or the opposite of what my family was doing for sure. Like that was definitely part of it. But I don't think this was like an intentional step away from what other people were doing. And in some ways, actually, until maybe quite recently, I wouldn't really have considered myself an entrepreneur. I wouldn't really have considered myself, someone who's actually building a business.
What changed it for you?
Yeah, maybe I just admitted to myself that I was actually, building a business that was,
Right.
unintentionally maybe success semi-successful, it's like, "Oh my gosh,
Okay.
this thing is growing and it keeps growing. Maybe we need to get serious about this." So definitely, in a lot of ways, a lot of it was unintentional. I mean, I'd had already been working in content and digital content, for a couple of years. And really I had wanted to move into audio for several different reasons. I like it. I listen to it a lot. Grew up listening, to NPR and a lot of the good radio in the US. And so I always looked to, model that in some way. And so and really it was just kind of random chance. A friend of mine had a company that was like the original Twitter, which was like an audio social network, right?
Yep.
And so they were
Mhm.
sending around audio messages back and forth. This was before the days of voice notes. Where now voice notes are, integral part of our society, whether we like them or
Yeah.
not. Uh,
Very much so.
and it was still awkward to hear your voice and send your voice to someone else on a short message and whatnot. So, they didn't have the traction that they wanted. They were growing, they were doing okay, but it wasn't quite where they wanted. And so when I came along and was like, oh, this could be really interesting to, pivot or to move towards podcasts, they loved the idea. And so basically, we came up with a scheme that would, as we hit certain targets and grew in certain ways, I would become a bigger partner, and then we leveled out at a certain place that I'm a partner with three other people basically, and I operate the company, and a lot of that vision, they are fantastic partners, in
Right.
that sense that they're extremely supportive. They don't get involved in details that too many cooks in the kitchen and whatnot. And
Hmm.
we have a fantastic relationship. And I think that's probably one of the reasons, that we've been successful is that, we have a really good working relationship with each other. And so Sowt has, from that meeting random kind of meeting as friends to discuss this to now we're 30 plus full-time employees. We have probably 40 or maybe even 50 kind of original podcasts now with the latest acquisition.
I do want to talk about, because that's initially when I reached out to you. Is I do want to talk about the Finial acquisition, because I think that was your first one. It was also the first one in the region, I think. Well, I think that we know. Um, so tell me, sort of, maybe where that got started, and for you specifically, right? So, or from South's perspective, to say, this is an interesting way for us to grow. That is, again, of course, it comes with a lot of, like you said, outside of the byproducts of the insights, it comes with a lot of great content. It comes with audience. It comes with a lot. So there's obviously very clear advantages as to why. But ultimately, you've also got to make, like you said, you've got to make the business sense out of it, right? Does it make sense to grow your team that quickly in a short amount of time? How do we make all the economics work? How do we? So tell me a little bit about that journey for you guys.
With Finyan specifically, Layla and I would touch base, every couple of months. So we would chat, we would, share notes, compare notes, talk about ideas and strategies. We were different enough that I don't think there was enough competition at the beginning to feel, to feel uncomfortable sharing information. And that relationship, we just kind of built over time. And so when, the opportunity arose, we had that kind of base to build on from. And so with Fignan, I think too, it was difficult in the sense that the content was quite different, fiction content, stories that we weren't used to telling in that way and whatnot. So there was that kind of element. With the second one with Rising Giants, it came in a similar way. Basil and I chat every once in a while. We compare notes. We were talking and seeing what was going on and seeing where, opportunities existed to work together. I've been saying for years now that there needs to be more consolidation. And I think, that strategy has proven, for us at least, has been proven fruitful. With both acquisitions, we didn't actually absorb the teams, and so we didn't add a bunch of people. But what we did add, and to the detriment of my team mostly, is that we added a bunch more work all of a sudden.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. Sorry, I actually thought that in the case of with Rising Giants that you did bring on some of the team. That's how I understood that.
Yeah, no, we
Basically,
did.
you brought in the content, the audience, all of that stuff, but not the team.
Right, exactly. They were essentially like content IP arrangements where all the IP and the content and the talent relationships and whatnot were
Sure,
all moved over to Salt. And so we're still in that process with Rising Giants. They've got some
of course.
fantastic
Yeah.
content creators and talent that they're working with. And I've already, spoken to most of them and had great conversations with all of them. And I think this is where too, values common values are probably needed across, companies that will merge. Um, uh, it's proven to be a very valuable point, meeting, the content creators and talent that Rising Giants had worked with. There was just this immediate affinity towards each other, the respect for the content, the goals working together. So I think that's been really
I
important.
mean, I know the Rising Giants one is still in progress, but maybe you can tell me maybe a couple of lessons that you learned from the Finial acquisition that were interesting to you, or maybe perhaps unexpected.
For me, I'm a pretty open person, you know. Really like to have um, you know, my team know what's going on and be a part of that conversation. I think for me, it was really tricky to know how much to talk about when and to whom. Who needs to know? How much do they need to know? And I think with the Finial one, that was harder and maybe a bit more sudden for people,
Right.
because that was kept pretty quiet and, only a couple people knew and, no one else really knew until, basically we were done with the transaction. With the Rising Giants, I brought in, based on that maybe mistake, that lesson. Um, I brought in more people earlier and got a lot more feedback on that. And I think that was smoother. It seems to have been better. And I think, being in the position of doing it a second time, you kind of know what is happening, even though, it's a new child. But you feel like, at least I felt, I've been through this like once, like nothing can scare
Sure.
me now, and so when issues arise, which they always do, right?
Of course. Yeah.
You're more equipped to handle them. So it felt a bit more comfortable the second time around.
Is there something you would have liked to know when you started that you know now?
Last year I spent a lot of time working on myself, as a leader, working on myself, being able to listen better, have clear decisions, communicating better, some of these things as we mature, as an organization and as individuals. And so I think I wish I would have started that earlier. I definitely, this idea actually on you're probably a Reddit geek like I am, but I spend some time on Reddit and there's these posts that I love, right? It's like a post that's like, "Hey, 40-year-olds, what is one thing that you would tell your 20-year-old self what you would do?" It's all like take care of your back, take care of your teeth, like it's random, start saving for retirement, 20 years ago, whatever. But one of them was, start working on yourself, in earlier in small pieces, because we go through education, like we learn a lot and there's all this development. We're growing really quickly. And then we get into our career and our professions, and there isn't that intentional growth. And so this is something that I personally wish I had done earlier and done more of earlier. And so what's the best way to mitigate that or to make up for that is instituted in the culture of the organization. So, we try to do that in different ways to encourage people to keep working on themselves. We're only as strong as, the individuals collectively. And so the stronger the individuals, the smarter, the faster, the more efficient, the more measured, better decision making, the better we are as an organization. And so I really, if I could go tell my 20-year-old self something, that would probably be that. And buy Bitcoin. No, just
I
kidding.
think it's funny. I think, I wonder if my 20-year-old self would take that on. I'm sure somebody told me that, by the way.
That's a really good point. Would I have listened to myself? Because in theory, that person was probably my father or my mother, or someone being like, "Keep working on yourself," and you're like, "Whatever,
Yeah,
I'm having a
exactly.
good time." So, no, but I think also, on a bigger level, like in the region, there's been examples of good leadership, and there's been examples of bad leadership, and I think, in specific issues that I'm very interested in, I've always been very worried about the leadership and what comes next and how that happens, on a political, economic, social, religious level there, this leadership. And I recently, was able to visit South Africa, and have like a very deep look at apartheid and how that was picked apart. And part of that was a very intentional core group of leaders that were developed, that were, built over time, and it was intentionally worked on. And I think this is where that intentionality is really important in us and in our organizations. And so, obviously, I won't, maybe I wouldn't have. My 20-year-old self wouldn't have listened to my 40-year-old self, but at least I can institute that in my organization and say, guys,
Absolutely.
everyone needs
Yeah.
to do one thing every year that is for your own self development, for yourself to grow as a person, as an individual. It can be creative, it can be leadership, it can be in the your technical area, but everybody's going to do one thing for themselves to develop. And so, that's one nice thing about being the boss is you can actually enforce that across all different levels. So, I'm an unintentional and uncomfortable leader, but I've learned to be okay with being uncomfortable and trying to be better at it instead of ignoring it.
It's funny, right? I was it just sort of getting into the headspace for our conversation today, and one of the things that I was remembering that live thing that we did around subscriptions and
Yeah.
stuff, and it was like it kept coming back to me, and I was like, yeah, we'll see. But that was kind of the recurring thought in my head that like this has to be more frequent than this. I mean, obviously there is in a way I wanted to kick off the conversation through the show because I want to kind of we're relaunching it,
Mm,
but I think the other side of it is also just I think there's so much value to be had in just having that chat, but not necessarily only privately, right? I think there's value to be had about having this chat, just coming together and saying, what's been going on. It doesn't have to always be about podcasting or content, but I think there's so much value
right.
even to add just in what we were talking about in terms of like how we're seeing
Yeah.
different things.
I have a couple of like monthly calls with other, media people. And we've also kind of chatted about making those, recording and whatnot, because they're very, very interesting. But I actually like the private nature of that. I think private and public need to
No, of
happen.
course. I mean, no,
But
no,
I
of
would
course.
love to speak to you
There's a
more, often than once
we
every
should do that.
3 years or whatever it is.
Yeah, definitely not once every 3 years. I agree.